the ArcheMedX video and podcast interview series. Our guest today is Rebecca Setta, the Associate Director at OncoSec. Welcome to our video and podcast, Rebecca.
Thanks, Kelly.
I'm so happy you were able to take some time to talk with us today. I was wondering if you could just start by giving us a little bit of an idea about your background.
Sure. So I've been in the clinical trial space for about 13 years now. I started my career with an imaging vendor and worked my way up through the ranks, I guess you could say, through lots of hard work and long hours. And eventually I had made the transition to CRO. And that was probably in about 2015. And really the impetus for me making that transition was having been part of an imaging vendor for so many years. I would attend these meetings and it would be, 2-day, 3-day meetings. And from an imaging standpoint, I would maybe present for 15 minutes. So really just wanting to continue to immerse myself in clinical trials, have a broader understanding, more responsibility, more management, more oversight. And I stayed within the CRO world for about 5 years. And just about 3 months ago, a little more than 3 months ago, I made the transition from CRO to OncoSec Medical.
Great. Well, maybe you can then tell us just a little bit about your role now at OncoSec, since it sounds like it might be a little bit different than your previous roles.
Yeah, so my role with OncoSec, I was really drawn to it because at that point in my career, I've been in a vendor space, I've been in the CRO space, and it's kind of my never-ending quest to continue to learn more, be exposed to more, be responsible for more. And for me, the next natural step was to be working direct for a sponsor. And with OncoSec, it gave me that opportunity and ability to have that exposure, to have those opportunities for learning. And especially within a biotech company, a smaller biotech company, you really do get visibility end to end of each of the components that go into the entire life cycle of drug development. And then also coming over into OncoSec as a director, associate director level, gave me the opportunity to grow and manage a team of clinical trial managers. And in my time, in my experience, I've amassed a lot of knowledge and experience. I was in the position where I just wanted to be able to start shaping a team to take advantage of all that I was able to learn and amass, in that time. So it gave me that opportunity to build and mentor and grow a team of clinical trial managers.
Yeah, that's really great. I've really enjoyed that in my career as well, and can certainly relate. There's something really exciting about pulling a group of people together who, collectively can achieve so much more than any one individual on the team. And then that light bulb moment when they all realize how much they're getting done is like you said, a lot of fun. So
yeah, and I would say that my career highlights have been building highly effective teams, specifically really more at a project level, but being able to take that and translate that into kind of a department level, in showing and teaching your team how to build a group that can actually fly. It's that moment of when everybody is performing, the wheels are all turning in unison, but then it's like where you're flying, and what your counterpart is thinking before they say it, so it's when you get to that point where the team really gels. I mean, it's probably, as a trial manager, one of the greatest greatest experiences, and giving the lessons learned and just, the management and the mentoring that allows your own team to have that has been really fun and exciting.
Yeah, I often find those are the times when you can honestly say work is pretty fun, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you get to those stages. So, before we get too far into it, like for our audience who might be a little bit new to immuno-oncology, and since your experience has taken you through the whole sort of breadth of clinical trial research, how would you maybe compare and contrast this new experience with maybe more traditional clinical trial research?
Well, I think that for immunotherapy in particular is very interesting and really has some momentum, and it's really what it's trying to do in general is harnessing your immune system to do what it does best, which is fight whatever is going on in your body. And that's really what OncoSec is trying to leverage with our therapy here. in particular, for the study that I'm assigned to is for melanoma, late stage metastatic melanoma, and um, you know, it's also an intratumoral therapy, which is also kind of new and exciting. Treating the lesions locally and directly, as opposed to an entire systemic approach. So it's been, really interesting, and something I think that here at OncoSec, we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I know early on in my career, I did a good bit of oncology work. And one of the challenges I faced was, these are very serious diseases, and many of the outcomes are, intense, maybe might be the word, right? How do you sort of help your team navigate that, where, some of the outcomes for some of the participants, can be very serious illness or even death and dying?
Sure. Yep.
Mm.
And I think that's especially true in the particular study that, I'm working on right now is, these are late stage patients, stage 3, stage 4, non-resectable metastatic melanoma. They're sick. They failed on every treatment, and this is really their last hope. And, so you are faced with a very real just situation that a lot of times these patients are facing end of life. And I think what's most motivating is focusing on the successes and focusing on the improvements. Like I said, these patients are end stage, they're out of options. And we actually just released in November a press release, and it was based on our SITC presentation. And we had 30% overall response rate for these patients that otherwise, may not have had any luck with anything else. So I think for us, it's focusing on the successes that we have had. These patients we've given, a second chance to, who thought that, they were, preparing for the worst, for the end. So that, I feel like that's how we stay motivated. And because of that, I would say my team in general just has an authentic belief in the therapy and how we're helping the patients. And so that alone motivates our team to success. And likewise, it motivates our investigators. They're seeing the real life responses of these patients that they're treating, and the turn of events essentially that's can happen for some of these patients. So they're seeing it firsthand, and that motivates them. And so a motivated investigator, a motivated site staff is only good for the clinical trial team.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. So as you sort of continue into the future, we've already touched on a few things like, obviously our industry is known for relatively long hours and some intensity, certainly here and there. And then certainly in this space, very high motivation. How can you not get motivated by the families and the patients who are experiencing these challenges? So with this highly motivated and high performing team, how do you balance burnout, making sure that you can maintain that over what is a long haul for clinical trials usually?
Yeah, I mean, I think is number one is assembling the right team. And so, finding the person that fits and being transparent with the expectations, what we're trying to achieve. And also, I think is showing your appreciation regularly. And for us, it's thank yous. It's tiny little notes or gifts here and there. I mean, just, for example, something so silly, but, for my study, we completed enrollment in one of the cohorts, and they sent out wine glasses so that you could, have a virtual toast. And, it's something so minor, but it means a lot. It means a lot to me as an employee, and it means a lot to my team who, was on the ground with me in the weeds. That it shows that you're valued, you're appreciated, and that, the work that you're contributing matters.
Yeah, definitely. Those are good examples. So a lot of people, I think they'll hear oncology studies and they'll certainly quickly think of complex study designs. It's kind of like synonymous, I think, out there in the
Yeah.
space. So can you share with our audience any challenges you've encountered, or even, how you overcame them when you're sort of approaching planning for a new trial?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, for this study in particular, I mean, I would say that the complexities are no greater than any other, oncology study that that we typically would run or develop. But I think for us, the most challenging piece for this trial, as I think for many trials across the world, has just been midstream study conduct, adapting to the new environment of COVID. So that has been where the challenge has really been in midstream. All of a sudden, a certain day, things changed, and then we had to kind of in stream adapt and be flexible and overcome all of these challenges that were I'm not sure. I mean, I like to think of myself as a pretty efficient risk mitigator and risk identifier early on, but I can say a global pandemic was not on my radar for 2020 going into 2021, and I think I'm probably not alone in that scenario. So that's been I would say that's been the most complicated and complex cog into our wheelhouse for this particular study.
Yeah, a lot of us who've been talking, we describe adjusting to the pandemic as sort of like dismantling and reassembling the airplane, but while it's still flying.
Yes, exactly.
And that is no easy task. So what's one or two things that you tried that really paid off, that really helped you overcome some of the COVID obstacles?
I think the first one was really from a clinical monitoring standpoint. We're used to be able to get our CRAs on site, source verify the data, review all of the documents, have the FaceTime with the staff, even that FaceTime with your staff. I mean, it serves a lot of purposes. And one of them is continued investment and engagement, in your study and what needs to get done. And, that kind of all stopped. A lot of our coordinators and things, went from in the office employees to full-time remote. Some site staffs were, cut down to a skeleton crew because maybe many of their other studies had closed down prematurely or just been canceled. So, the staff that were supporting them, are then reduced. And so, with that, with fewer people still, trying to navigate electronic medical records, figuring out how to, best monitor this data has been a challenge. And I would say that the way that we've been able to overcome that is really a change in mindset from our CRAs. And, what I've shared to them is, we don't get the bang that we get when you go on site and, you have their attention, you're in a little room and they resolve all of those queries. They look at the data, they're bringing in the subject, but we're not getting that. So we're not getting the kind of drastic movement or swing that we would see, for example, in data cleaning, when you're on site. And so the change in mindset has been, working with my CRAs to think of themselves more of project managers of their sites, so they're not traveling as much. They're, mostly office based at this time. So really thinking about, okay, how can you do this effectively and remotely? So it's really kind of giving them the tools and skills to essentially project manage their sites. And I think that so far that's been really effective. And and also I think making mini milestones or mini goals along the way. So, with all of the things that I had mentioned, it can cause, for example, a backlog in data. So, that can be extremely overwhelming for a coordinator, especially maybe it's who used to be one of three and now it's just one. Okay, let's focus on one subject every single week, and having the CRA effectively project manage the coordinator to help them through each step, one subject at a time. So that I think for us that's been what's been most helpful and meaningful in helping us overcome some of those obstacles that were really thrown at us as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, what I hear you saying is that we sort of have to both upskill our CRA staff into some of these new project management skills. But then you mentioned earlier just the importance for motivation and sustaining the intensity of these projects and finding things to celebrate. And so by breaking it down into those tiny little pieces, you're finding that ability to keep celebrate rather than calling them and being like, you're still behind.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, you got such and such done this week. Great job.
Great job. Exactly. Now let's focus on what's next. So now we're going to move to subject, so that's how we've been, really been able to see that turnaround. And, the other thing is, really partnering with the site and saying, how can we best help you? What is it that you need that we can, help you with to meet what we're trying to accomplish here? So really listening, it's not a one size fits all mentality. Each of our sites are their own little microcosm. So we need to figure out, this approach has worked with a lot of sites, but what are the other idiosyncrasies maybe that come into play that we need to customize for our sites, and how to help them, work with us and collaborate as a team, and even if that means, we have several vendors, numerous vendors across the portfolio, and how can we receive that information and synthesize it for them so that they can more easily address and understand? So, just trying to understand, where they're coming from. They're experiencing a lot of the same challenges, that we've experienced, and how can we best support them? How can we best help them? And like I said, it's not always a one size fits all solution.
Yeah, that's a good example. Certainly at ArcheMedX, that's something we're doing. We're really thinking about the data and synthesizing it the way you're talking about, so it's immediately actionable rather than them getting something that they have to wade into and consume and analyze themselves. So I totally understand the value, the value of that. So as we sort of lean forward and we try to think about, the future, what of sort of the challenges that have then led to these things that you're trying new, which of those do you think will persist? Right? Like if we could wave the magic wand and the pandemic was gone tomorrow, what do you think will persist as value add in the future of ClinOps?
Yeah, I think there'll still be a focus and a push for technology that supports doing things remotely. I think it will just be better balanced with, remote and in-person interactions and collaboration, because I think that there is a lot that can be gained and be gained very quickly, through the use of technology and remote access and things. But I still don't think that will fully replace. I don't. So I guess for any sites that are hoping that means no more CRA visits, I really don't think that's going to happen. I think our CRAs will still, want to be on site, and I think there's still a lot of value there. But I think there'll be that continued drive and push to have things on a more real-time basis that's facilitated by technology. And some of the things that we're starting to do now as well is, since we do have more real-time access to, the data that they're inputting, is, what kind of, risk-based monitoring approaches can we take? What are some signals that we can see, in advance by, a couple of clicks and, access, an EMR or, different signals and things like that, so that we can, the goal is potentially get ahead of these challenges before they happen. And if we can do that because of the direct access, to with some of these sites, then that's what we're doing, and that's what I would hope will continue to grow, even after, the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I've experienced a lot of that similar piece, right? It's like the historical of, we're always going to go on site, and maybe the holdouts of it are, I'm going to do 100% SDV, and like really over here on this side. And then we've experienced the opposite extreme of complete access removal and complete remote, and having to do everything in these different ways. And it's sort of like, it's accelerated maybe optimizing, I'm hoping, that we find that sweet spot of like, well, you don't have to do that the way you used to do it. It's okay if some of these components are delivered virtually. And here's where in-person just can't be beat.
Exactly.
So I'm optimistic about that as well for the future. So I know your role here has been relatively short, right? You're a few months in. But what so far has just been like either the most interesting or like the most surprising about oncology research?
Yeah. So, for me, I've been in oncology studies for a long time, since my imaging days, working through oncology. And I would say at OncoSec, though, the most interesting, component of oncology research would be the combination therapy with a device. I hadn't had a lot of device experience going into this, so having that has been really interesting. And then, of course, what is the future of the device with the electroporation, the future potential uses and indications that we would be able to parlay and apply moving forward.
Yeah, that must be exciting, right? Because you're developing both that product as well as really considerations for, the treatment itself. So pulling all that together, right, is an added complexity. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, beyond, OncoSec and obviously the potential of the product moving forward, what are some other things about this industry in general that just impress you as you move through your career?
I would say what's impressed me as I've moved through my career is really the continued investment of the people, of the people that I work with, of course, at the various companies throughout my career, and also the different folks that we collaborate with on a regular basis. But of course, our site personnel, our investigators, and our coordinators. Especially this year, we've had such a curveball thrown at us, and minus some of the obstacles that we've had to overcome. I mean, our studies have not stopped, and we've been able to adapt and move forward and figure out how to continue to treat patients, to continue to give them access to, in some cases, this life-saving therapy. And that really is through the sheer hard work and dedication of the people involved. And when everything else seemed to be falling apart around us, globally and in our communities, we kept persevering and kept moving forward. And I think, I think that in my career, it's something that I've always been impressed with, just the dedication to research, to the studies, to our patients, but especially this past year where it's been so hard. That everyone has really pulled together and figured out how do we keep going forward. So I would say that that's really it shouldn't, but it does. It continues to surprise me and inspire me on a regular basis.
Yeah, we've done some previous conversations just really about the burden oftentimes on sites, as well as maybe the unsung role they'll play even as we progress through more decentralized, trials. And so I think that's a great point that you make about how resilient and committed they are. Are there any characteristics that have emerged about sites that have just adapted the best?
That's a good question. I would say that it would have been for us anyway, the sites who had already been on the early side of adapting some sort of technology solutions for various things. And so for them, the adjustment and transition to having to do things mostly virtually was less of a challenge for them. I mean, even maybe the sites who had where their coordinators maybe were 4 days in the office, 1 day work from home, they already kind of had that set up. So adapting that, I mean, of course it's a shock, but adapting that into a 5 day a week or what have you setup was a little bit easier for them. I mean, even just the fact that they would have had laptops at home, or maybe their laptop could already connect to their VPN, things like that, if you don't already have that established, can take, several days, weeks, even months in some institutions to establish.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in some ways, yeah, even if you're only doing a little bit of adopting, but you're leaning in a little bit,
Yeah, exactly.
better prepared for whatever disruptions we, just like you mentioned early on in the conversation, we didn't have a pandemic on our radar for planning this year. So there's potentially other things out there in our future that we don't have on our radar. And this adaptability, resilient piece is going to, I think, be key to all of us going forward. So,
Exactly.
well, I want to give you the opportunity. Like, is there anything else that we haven't gotten to discuss or you'd like to share?
I think that, just one thing to note that's interesting is, of course, in a pandemic climate, there has been, a lot of focus globally, but of course also within in our own country in drug development, particularly around the coronavirus vaccine. And so I just think that it's a really interesting time to be working in drug development when there's so much focus and attention. And I think just more education in general, or awareness, just because of the climate that we're in. So I think that it's been a fun experience, for me to, educate, family and friends on drug development and things like that, because it's something that's, on the forefront of their minds that they, really wouldn't have previously thought about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's become like a household conversation,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Everybody is so focused on the vaccine that then it gives you that platform to talk about it. I certainly have enjoyed just the focus on innovation and flexibility.
Yeah.
It fits what I enjoy, certainly in my career. And it's almost like it's dissolved many of the obstacles, right? Like the resistance to trying things has melted away. And now you kind of have a clean slate to try new things, and whichever ones work, maybe they'll stick around to help us go faster in the future.
Yeah. And I think too, for me, I mean, when I was, in college and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I didn't even know really that this was an option or an opportunity. It wasn't even on my radar. I knew that I had an interest in research in general, but I didn't really know what that meant that I could do within my career. And so I think that this just gives clinical research as a career path for people who maybe are science minded or, you know, uh, have some kind of interest in the sciences that maybe they don't, medical school's not on their radar. It's not something that they would like to, pursue. It puts this as a career path and opportunity kind of out there in the forefront. That I think is important. That for me, and I live in Philadelphia, and we have between Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York. I mean, we have a ton of pharmaceutical companies and biotech, and it wasn't even something that was obvious to me. So I think having a national platform, I mean, a global platform really, but having that platform out there, especially for for folks who are coming up and coming through, college and education now, I think it makes me excited for the future because, it puts it out there as an option that someone could pursue. And it just makes me really look forward to, who will find us next, what will be the next, generation of researchers coming through.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so interesting and very similar to my path. I did not know this could be a career or something I studied, but I was into science and
Yeah.
research, and actually became an audiologist and was at the hospital when they did their first cochlear implant device trials. And
Wow.
they were like, "Hey, Kelly, can you lead these clinical trials?" And I was like, "What's a clinical trial?" And now it's been 20 years, and I've really, really enjoyed the ride. So I'm glad to hear you feel that way as well. And you're right, like it's opened up access to people who may not have found us, and hopefully can add value in the future.
Yeah.
So Rebecca, where can our audience learn more about OncoSec?
I would say the best way to learn more about OncoSec would be to check out our website, oncosec.com. There's a whole host of information about the company, our pipeline, our press releases. So anything that you're interested for OncoSec, that would definitely be the place to go. There is even our SITC poster that we presented in November is available on the website. So that would be the best place to go.
That sounds good. Well, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today, Rebecca. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know our audience will learn a lot.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kelly. Likewise.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Conversations in Clinical Trial Readiness. If you're interested in learning more about our team, head to our website, archemedx.com, or follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us.